Today I'm joined by Dr. Stephen Paul Edwards, the author of the Venus Flytrap, Sex, Lies and Repercussions, a work of erotic non-fiction that draws on real-life experiences to explore obsession, toxic chemistry and the cost of living out our fantasies. Stephen hails from Blackpool in the UK. For some reason, he decided to head off to the sunny climes of Florida. I can't imagine why. He's a PhD in spiritual counselling, international speaker and coach that helps people untangle the patterns that keep them looping through the same relational and sexual stories. I'm curious to talk with Stephen to find out what happens when desire turns into psychological warfare and how we begin to move from chaos to conscious intimacy. Well, thank you so much for joining me. It's very, very kind of you to spend the time. I want to start really by just taking you back a little bit into your formative years, just to explore a little bit about family, early relationships, and how did your upbringing shape your ideas about connection, love, intimacy?
Yeah. Well, I know it doesn't come as any shock to you, but it all begins there, right? For everybody, right? All our patterns are shaped. In fact, there's a famous pastor once said, "Give me your son until he's 7 years old, and I will show you the man." Right. So my childhood, like most people's, was very traumatic. Right. We don't know that at the time, right? We just think we're the only kid in town that's having a rough time, right? But usually it's everybody in some way, shape, or form, because that's when the challenges that we are gifted with to overcome in life, so we can build character, strength, resilience, and all those things that you need to survive in the world. You don't see it that way, and you're not supposed to see it that way, right? I guess there's a time in our lives when we're supposed to be a bit of a victim, because we don't have choices. Whatever our parents say has to go. And when I was growing up, in my household, my parents were very good at gaslighting. They were very manipulative. They were very controlling. So it was a lot of fun. So it was, it was challenging. All I ever wanted to do was run away from home. And I did. I ran away 8 times, but they kept catching me and bringing me back. But anyway, what that caused for me to feel, because, somebody else might have felt the same way. But I was very restricted. I almost felt like I was in a straitjacket when I went to bed. I used to bang my head on the pillow until I was exhausted to fall asleep. And I couldn't get to sleep any other way. But that's how much rage, anger, and frustration was built up in me until I was 16. And then I was in a mental institution. They put me in an insane asylum, right? They gave me electroconvulsive therapy, which for some reason they thought was going to help. The challenge was I was on a high, right? I was so high that I later discovered that, actually having a spiritual awakening, but that wasn't on the roster of potential problems for the therapist and the doctors in a mental institution. It's like, there's something wrong with you. We got to try and fix it the best we can. So with the electroconvulsive therapy and all the drugs they gave me, they brought me down until I was depressed. And then when I got depressed, they said, "Okay, you're normal now. You can go home." So kind of, I'm making a joke of it, but I mean, that's the reality of it, right? Because they don't know any, really, even today, they know such a small amount about what's going on with people. And they just simply use drugs to try and put them back into what they call normal state. But anyway, so I went through that, but I was ashamed of it. So I was carrying all the shame and guilt about something I had no control over, but was frowned upon by society, right? Having mental illness is like you're an outsider, you're, almost like a leper, right? So it's not something you generally talk about in company, right? Or even to people you know. It's something you keep suppressed, which is not doing you any good because it means you're living half a life. And this isn't the only thing I was ashamed about. I'm just giving one example because obviously we only have a limited amount of time. So I was carrying all this through my life and these patterns of being afraid and not being able to trust because I couldn't trust my parents, right? They would shut me down emotionally because when they didn't want me to do something, they would frame it in such a way you couldn't say anything else. So they would say, "You don't want to do that, do you, Andrew?" You know what I mean? So what are you going to say? "Yeah, actually I do." And then they're going to be mad with you and you don't want to upset your parents, right? So you just go, "Yeah, no." It's like you don't want to have an ice cream, do you? Right? You know what I mean? So you would say, "Yeah, no." Right? So you don't get an ice cream, but you keep the peace. So anyway, that's manipulation, obviously, and control. And that's why I felt I had no voice, and that's why I had to get away. I kept running away. Then at 16, I left and never went back. And that set me off on a journey, of course, 16. It's pretty young to be out there, So I got a little, what they called it, I can't Well, we lived in Blackpool, right? So you could easily
Yeah,
find a place to stay. You know, it was a one-room apartment that I got with my friend, and we stayed in there. It was a nightmare, right? Um, so one of the biggest things that came from that, and about many, many other things, was I was always giving the most I can, always considerate at how everybody else
mm,
felt. Well, I don't want to say it like that. Oh, I could. If someone said it like that to me, I'd be hurtful. It would be hurtful, right? But then recognizing that not everybody lived that way, and so I would constantly feel like you're not considering my feelings or how I feel, because I was doing that all the time. You have this expectation. Well, shouldn't you be considering my feelings? Because obviously, when I was at home, my
mm.
parents didn't. So anyway, these patterns were created early in my life and then affected every relationship I had. So I was married 4 times, which is, a couple of things there. One is, people say, well, what was wrong with all these women? And I go, well, let's do the
Yeah.
math
There's
here.
there's
There
there's
was
one
four
common
marriages,
denominator. It's not the whole women. Yeah.
4 different women, only one constant throughout the whole time. It was me, right? But I didn't realize that to begin with, right? But I was bringing all this baggage with me. And so if they ever didn't consider my feelings, I'd get upset. So these kind of things that trouble with you. I was very rebellious, obviously, from being a kid and just breaking out of that, not feeling like I had a family. So you look for family elsewhere, which is usually not going to be
Mhm.
positive, right? So I got into all kinds of trouble there. Then I got into drugs. So I went through, uh, like I said, being the rebel without a cause. And then when I came to America, and this is going to sound a little strange, I guess, I don't know, but I decided I'm going to go live in America. Everybody's healthy in America. That was my perception, right? So I thought, I'm going to start working out. I'm going to start eating right. I'm going to start thinking right. And I got into personal development. And then, things happen for a reason. I ended up meeting Tony Robbins, right? And going to work with him. And that was like a dream come true. I made it sound very simple. It wasn't that
Yes,
easy,
there's
right?
a plane is,
But
yeah.
it's not like you can just not like you go look for Tony Robbins and say, "Yeah, you got a job," right? It was quite a process. Anyway, so that happened, and then when I was working with Tony, he introduced me to more spiritual leaders like Deepak Chopra, Wayne Dyer, maybe names that you remember, but a lot of your audience are going, "Who the hell are they?" But anyway, they were spiritual leaders at that time. And then I started doing my own mind, body, spirit events. Then I got into counseling because people would ask me after the event, that was amazing. It was transformational. Would you be my coach? And I'm thinking, well, I don't have licensure to do that, right? So I don't want to end up in jail. And I wasn't going to go and spend 7 years becoming a psychologist. So I found out that you could actually become a spiritual counselor and you would have licensure to
Mhm.
counsel, right? So that's why I did the spiritual counseling thing, so I could coach and counsel the my clients, my attendees, the people that supported me. So I went into all that. I'd worked with Tony Robbins, I did the spiritual counseling, but I was full on, Andrew. I'm just a very intense person because of my childhood, right? Because I was always looking to throw myself into something else rather than dealing with reality, and I was running away. There was, I'll never forget this, and this is a perfect metaphor. There was a dog across the road from where we lived. And this dog was a little terrier, but he had a Napoleon
Mhm.
syndrome, right? So he thought he could just about be any dog, no matter how big it was, to the point where he used to chase cars, right? So this car's driving away and he's chasing it. And of course, the car keeps going and goes, right? So he's thinking, yeah, I can even scare a car, right? And then one day he's chasing this car down the road and the car stopped suddenly. And the dog came boom into the back of the car, right? And it whimpered and it was scared. So it ran the opposite direction. What was it running away from? It was running away from the pain. It thought if it ran fast enough, the pain couldn't keep up with it, right? And so that's a perfect metaphor for me. I'd spent my life running away from the pain, not being prepared to turn back and look at it. I mean, healing wasn't even a thought. I mean, the healing pain, what is that, right? So I spent my life running away. You talked about living in all these different places. I lived in every city in the United States, or every large city at some time or another,
Yeah.
working, pouring myself into what I was doing. But as you know, the saying, wherever you go, there you are, right? So I was, usually I was working 7 days a week, very often 14, 16 hours a day. What does that not leave time for? Like your wife said, you may, being at home 1 week a month is not going to work it, right? So all these things combined to give me a very successful life externally, but in terms of being at home in relationships and with myself, not so much, right? And so that's when I guess we're going to get to that point, right? Where what happened in the Venus flytrap happened. So all my life, I'd gone through building things, being very successful, and then imploding it. And then having to recreate myself again. Same thing over and over again. So I'd just gone through being burned out again with what I was doing. I can't do this anymore. I didn't even want to get on stage. I didn't even want to go speaking. I didn't want to do anything. My marriage is dissolving again. My fourth marriage is ending. And so there's a void, right? And the universe abhors a void, right? So in this case, it filled it with this amazing woman who, kicked my ass, as you might want to say, right? But showed me, and I didn't realize this until later so much. I mean, I got it in parts, right? But then I lost my mind. But she was mirroring me back to me. She was a mirror of me, showing me, and I think it was the lady that you interviewed. I've listened to a couple of your podcasts, but and I can't remember her name. It was like LY something. I mean, I'm sorry, I should have written her name down. You know what I mean? Yeah. The last podcast you did, anyway. And she was talking about how just because a relationship ends doesn't mean it failed. First of all, the marriage doesn't mean it failed if it's whatever it is. It served its purpose, which I guess they all did. But she was mirroring back to me the pieces of myself that I'd left behind. Right? That I'd left behind, or I had been afraid of owning myself, right? So for example, I had always been a speaker for somebody else, Tony Robbins, Robert Kiyosaki, you name it, right? I've worked with all these gurus, not all these gurus, but a lot of gurus. Why? Because I was afraid to do it myself, right? I was hiding behind somebody else, right? So I wasn't being it doesn't mean that I didn't learn a lot for those, and I don't have any regret from doing it. However, what it told me was, wait a minute, why? I could do it just as well as they can, right? Why have I not? Well, because I was afraid. I was afraid to put it out there, and I wasn't prepared to start at the beginning and go through the process. I was latching onto people, really riding their coattails, right? So these are things she helped me to see, right? How to be authentic, how to be vulnerable, how to really look at those patterns. And I had the time because I wasn't running away anymore, right? Well, I was running into this relationship, as it were, but this relationship was giving me the opportunity to see myself and heal. So I'm very grateful to her. People go, "You're grateful to her? She kicked your ass." I know, but sometimes you need your ass kicking, right? And so whether she realized it consciously, no, unconsciously though, as a soul, as a spirit, she knew that she was giving me the lessons that I needed to recognize and heal in myself.
Having read the book, it's incredibly raw and passionate and intimate and sexual, all the words you can think of. What gave you the courage to actually put pen to paper or finger to keyboard or whatever? Because it's a hell of a lot putting yourself out there in such a vulnerable state with it. So what gave you the courage to write the book?
Well, I think it helps being an idiot.
That's a brilliant answer.
Which you cannot read that book without going, "This guy's an idiot."
There were times when I sort of questioned some of the decision making rationale, but at the time I was like, "Oh, what a lucky bastard!" But yes.
Yeah, exactly, right? Exactly. That is true. Yeah. But you're very good. You're very diplomatic. But yeah, okay. So, but yes, obviously I was getting something out of it, right? You wouldn't stay, right? And I was getting a lot out of it. And I would say, and in the book, you talked about it being a narrative rather than just talking about the experiences, because that's how I talk, right? And that gave me a challenge because, I'd get an editor and they'd change everything. I go, but that's not how I talk. I'm telling the story. You're losing me. You're losing my personality in there, which, as you know, is a pretty important part of it because it's freaking funny, right? And very honest. I mean, it's not perfect grammar, right? And it's not necessarily the way to write perfectly, It's just me talking, right? And I wanted to keep that essence um, because I like humor. It's me, and I wanted the story to be me. I wanted it to be real. Um, so to get back to your question, though, what what caused me to do that or gave me the courage? Well, in a way, she did. Because she made me realize that vulnerability is a power. It's not a weakness at all. It's a power. And when you can be vulnerable, maybe I went to the extreme because that's me, right? No, you don't have to be vulnerable and put it in a book, right? But I did. And so what that did, though, Andrew, it gave me freedom because now I was no longer afraid or ashamed of those things. And that's such a release because that's energy that's holding you back and it's in there. What if people found out about this? What would people say? You're gonna lose your image. And you go, well, if that's the case, fine, because trying to be everything to everybody's never gonna work. It's freaking exhausting, right? And it makes you feel alone. So by being vulnerable and putting that out there, nobody has that over you anymore. Right? You don't have it over you anymore, right? And it's so free. I didn't know that when I did it. I was scared. I don't know if we can swear on it, but I was scared, right, to do it. It took courage. It did take courage because courage is not the absence of fear. It's when you're afraid and you do it anyway, right? And I just thought, but this is authentic. This is what happened, right? So I'm going to share it as it was and then let the chips fall where they may. And I even say in the book, listen, people are going to vilify me for this, right? They're going to say, oh my God, it's obscene, it's pornographic or whatever, all kinds of things people will make up. And I say, look, people will vilify me, but it won't be for the first time. And it probably won't be for the last. And as long as you're true to yourself and you let it out, I think it's going to be okay. Now, have people vilified me? Yeah, of course, right? But also a lot of people that read the book say, I can see me there. I've done that or I've done this. And, I always thought I was alone. And I thought I was stupid, but not as stupid as you. Right? Whatever it is, right? But it lets people know you're not alone. And I think that's one of the hardest feelings for us as human beings to deal with, right? I mean, it's used in wars and in prisons as a form of interrogation, right? A form of punishment, a form of torture, really, right? So I think it's hard for people to, and I felt alone through a lot of this for a lot of my life, right? Because I was hiding things and because I was going through something that people just usually, unless they've been through it, they don't really understand it, right? And so to know and hear from someone who's been through it, be able to read a book about it, which is non-threatening, it's not telling you what to do. It's not saying this is the right way. If anything, it's saying this is the wrong way to do it, right? And to learn without, a finger being put in your face and say, this is what you should do, and owning it and being able to own it in a public forum, then my hope is it will give other people the courage, not to put it in a book, right? But to come out and share some things, maybe with the people they love, because, and I know you talk about this intimacy, right? Intimacy is not just sexual, right? Intimacy is really, sexual intimacy is a result of emotional intimacy to me, right? So when you can share things with your partner that nobody else knows, that's intimacy. That's intimacy. That's trusting that person, and all relationships are built on trust, right? Trust and intimacy. And then to be that, you have to be vulnerable. You got to be prepared to put it out there. Love means you got to be vulnerable because you might love someone, they might not love you back, right? You can't control that, right? But at least what was that famous saying? It's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all, right? So you may as well, if you feel like this is the person that you love and you want to be with the rest of your life, then go for it, Could they use that against you? Yes, but they're not the right person for you, are they? And now you know. Rather than wondering your whole life whether they are the right person, whether you can trust them and you can be intimate with them. And eventually, if you don't, then there's going to still be a separation between you. There's going to be that fear. Well, what if they find out about that? Yeah. And then maybe they don't love me anymore. And I put 20 years into this marriage. They find that out and now it's over, right? So the fear gets worse. So Next question.
Well, I think a thing I sort of thought when reading it is obviously it's all the human emotions dialed up to a 10, dialed up to an 11, dialed up to 100, and I think for a lot of people, and when I was reading it, I thought, gosh, yes, gosh, yeah, I've felt like that or felt like this, and I think what it is there's all these, it goes almost to the extreme, but a lot of people can absolutely find moments in it, experiences in it they can relate to. Maybe not an 11, maybe a 6 or a 5, but things that they can recognize in themselves.
Yeah, yeah,
Was
yeah.
that part of the thought process when you're writing it to actually this is going to resonate with, even though the actual elements won't be exactly the same, parts of this will resonate with people as they read it?
No, it really wasn't. I was just telling the story. I was just telling a story as authentically as I could. It wasn't until later, Andrew, that I figured out, wow, this could be a healing story. I mean, when you first read it or you think about it, you think, no, but it is definitely a story of, don't do
Yeah.
this, right? This is, However, it wasn't until afterwards when people started reading it and I saw that people were having healing experiences. And then, I was having deep healing experiences, and I still am, right? I still am. It still unfolds because I'm talking about it, right? And as you're talking about it, more stuff comes up. So just a few days ago, I'm walking around the house and it's like, it sounds weird that people would walk around a house and then start to have revelations about who they are, right? But I had this revelation and I realized that I have an issue with intimacy, right? Now, not physical intimacy, but emotional
Yeah.
intimacy. So then when I recognize something like that, what do? I go right back to my childhood. Where did that
Mm.
begin? How did I formulate this pattern of being afraid of emotional intimacy, right? Well, it's because my parents, you don't really want that from your father so much, but from my mother, she wasn't able to really uh, give that intimacy. What do I mean? So, for examples, I remember as a child, she would never come up and read me a book or come up and talk to me before I went to sleep. She would just turn the light out and go, right? Now, that's not blaming. It's just because that's what she was
Yeah.
used to, right? That was from her trauma, right? But you don't know that as a kid, right? So those things uh, are part of intimacy, right? Not physical intimacy, but they're emotional intimacy, right? And so whenever I would get a compliment or someone would say something that would potentially lead to emotional intimacy, I'd push it away. And so what happens when you continue to do that? People stop doing it, right? Because uh, they don't want to make you feel bad, and they don't want to feel bad themselves about giving a compliment or doing something nice, right? Because it makes them not feel good. And if it doesn't make you feel good, what's the point? So without realizing it from those early experiences, you tend to push it away. And people would even say that to me in my life, why do you push everybody away that cares about you? Well, it came from that place, right? But now recognizing where it comes from, where the pattern is, now I can break that pattern.
Did did you confront, challenge, question, bring this up with your parents as you when you once you're an adult, about how they were,
Yeah. Yeah.
and how was that
Yeah, I
conversation?
did. That's one of the most courageous things I
Yeah.
ever did too, right? So, if I ever tried to talk to my parents pretty much about anything, they would manipulate it in a way that it would end up in an argument because they still wouldn't let me be heard, right? So I knew trying to have a conversation with them about it I wasn't going to get anywhere. So what I actually did is I wrote a letter. Now, most psychologists will hear you, but don't send the letter.
Write
Just
it, put it
write
in the
the
drawer.
letter,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Right? Put it in a drawer somewhere. Writing the letter will be very cathartic, which is true, but I mailed
Of
it
course you
anyway.
did. How,
Anyway,
how could
yeah,
I expect anything else at all? Of course you mailed it.
right. But I was scared, man. I mean, I thought this is my rationale in my mind, right? If I send this letter, I'm probably never going to hear from them again, right? But then I said, yeah, but I don't have a relationship with them now anyway.
Mm.
So what have I really got to lose? Maybe this is the last thing I can do. And so I sent it. And I sent one to both of them, right? It's the same letter, but I sent it to, so they didn't have to wait for the one to read it, right? I thought, I'm not going to let that happen, right? So I sent them both a letter. And, so so life carried on, right? I don't know. I don't remember, to be honest, Andrew, how long it was after I sent the letter, but sometime later, and I was doing counseling at that time. The reason I'm telling that is because I had a bunch of chairs in my living room where people would sit and wait, right? And so the point is, there was these chairs along the wall. So anyway, I come in and, I get to the phone, because then you didn't have cell phones back then, right? It was like you got the phone and you got your messages, right? So I get a message, and, you probably think that if anybody's going to call, it's going to be your mom, right? But it wasn't. It was my dad. And that shocked me right out of the gate, right? And he said, Stephen, we got your letter. We don't agree with everything, but call me. Now, as a child and a man, believing that your father has never loved you, that blew my mind, to the point I fainted. And I was standing in front of those chairs, and I just fell back, and I sat in one of the chairs. It wasn't intentional. I didn't even know there was anything behind me. I hadn't thought of that. I was just, wow, that's how powerful that moment was for me, right? And so that changed everything, right? By the way, I'm not suggesting that everybody has a problem with a parent. You send them a letter. Everything doesn't work for everybody in every situation, right? I can tell so many stories of people going through healing processes, but I always preface it by saying, this might not be the way you do your healing, because everybody's healing is different, right? Everybody needs to heal different things, because people say, well, tell me how I heal my something or other. And I go, I have no idea yet, right? I don't know. I don't know what's going to be right for you until I really have spent time with you, that I can help you with that. So, and I call myself a heartist, because really the healing has to get back to your heart, right? The wound ultimately is in your heart, right? So recognizing what the heart is, all that stuff, right? And then Heartist is because I've learned so many tools working with Tony Robbins, working with all these spiritual teachers, doing all these spiritual exercises, having experiences like this, that I have such a palette of tools, of paint, that I can help you create the masterpiece that's you, right? And so you're just a canvas, and some people have thrown some things on there that really doesn't serve you. All we got to do is change that and paint something different, and you're going to be fine, right? And I tell people, look, you don't have a relationship problem. You just have a pattern problem. And those patterns were created before you were even really aware they were being created, and you just brought them through your life. It doesn't make you a bad person. And it doesn't make the other person wrong either, right? It just means if we change those patterns, you will never attract that type of person in your life again, because you brought them into your life. We've usually gone through some work before I would say something like that, because people, at the beginning, if you said to someone who's gone through physical, sexual, or any kind of abuse, and you say, well, yeah, you did it, they're going to kill you, right? So you have to take people through a process. But once you got to that point where they recognize that, yes, that person did do that. Yes, they hit you. Yes, they might have done this. They did, but they did it for you. And there's a silver lining here. All we have to do is be committed to that, and we'll find it. And we always do, always, right? There's always something in there. But what is in there, that healing, is not the same for everybody. And so you can't deal with it in the same way. You have to find the resource, the tool that's going to help them do that healing. There's a million or an infinite number of reasons why things occur in your life. Nobody can tell you why except you, but you can tell someone why by going through a process, a series of questions, of revealing, what happened in your childhood, how that has mirrored through your life. And you can see this pattern reoccurring. So you go, yeah, I've been doing that a lot in a lot of different situations. So maybe it's not the person. Maybe I'm recreating it from my wounds, right? And so a belief that I am committed to, which is not easy to live, it's easy to say, and that is, nothing happens to you. Everything happens for you. So if you break that down, you go, well, if you think it happened to you, now you have a wound. And people walk around very wounded, right? But if you say it didn't, I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm just saying if you say to yourself, well, it happened for me, and you commit to finding what it was, the reason it happened for you, now you're wiser. Now you have wisdom. And I promise anybody that will do that, that problem will never happen again. Because the reason for it being there is no longer there. There's no longer a reason for it to happen. So it happens at a very energetic, or you might say spiritual level. That once you've let go of whatever it is, the anger, the hurt, the pain, the inability to forgive that person, it's over. It's gone. If you really, really do forgive them, right? Not just say, well, I'll forgive him then. That's not really forgiving, right? So once you don't have any energetic pull, like nobody can trigger you with that again, now you're healed. So even if it does happen, it won't happen in the same way. So if someone comes in and does that, it will not have that power over you anymore. That's what I mean. So it becomes a different experience. You can just move past it. You don't get hooked on it, right?
Do you find that people tend to present with similar issues, or do people come to you just more about sex and addiction? It's more about relationships, more about spiritual things? Do they? What do you think it is that brings people to you?
They're all fucked up.
No,
I'm just kidding, right?
we all are.
We all are, really, if you want to be really raw about it, right? Because, we were meant to be messed up, right? And then we have that opportunity then, that gift of healing that and experiencing more of who we are. So one of the beliefs I have, and I'm not saying this is necessarily true, it's just a belief. And beliefs are not true. We make them all up, right? But you got to ask yourself, does the belief you've made up take you closer to where you want to go or further away? If it's further away, maybe you want to change that belief. If it's closer, then great, let's keep it, right? So I believe that our journey through this life experience is about rediscovering who we really are, right? And living that in the physical form. And we're given challenges, because if we didn't have challenges and struggles to get there, what's the point? It wouldn't even be worthwhile. It's like, we're already there. Who cares, right? So I believe in our nature, in our natural state of being. We're not humans having a spiritual experience. We're spirits having a human experience. Most people have heard that before, right? And in our spiritual expression, we are just perfect points of light. Love is light, right? And we are fully enlightened because we're light, right? But if we came into this life fully enlightened, what's the point, right? What's the point? So we come in at different stages of forgetfulness, that we've forgotten these things, because if we didn't, we couldn't have the experience. So for example, when I went through this toxic relationship, I knew all this stuff. I'd had Satori, which is instant awakening, all this stuff, all these incredible experiences. Here's the thing though, everything is a wave, right? So you can feel fantastic one minute, right? You wake up the following morning, you feel like hell. Well, how's that? You felt great yesterday. What's wrong with you, right? Well, because it's a wave. So even when you look at the greatest deities that you can imagine, right? They were never fully enlightened. At different times, they lowered, their vibration was lowered, and they experienced different things, So let me give you an example here, and this may resonate with some people, but you can say it for every one of them. Let's just take Jesus, for example, right? Jesus was enlightened at some times, but at other times he wasn't. So for example, when wasn't he enlightened? Well, in the story, it talks about when he went to see the Pharisees, and he was mad with them. He was angry with them, and he threw all that stuff around, right? You don't do that when you're enlightened, right? So he came in and out. So my point is, whatever you know, you will forget. And you'll forget it at certain times so you can have experiences you otherwise wouldn't have. So by going through those experiences that can be painful, traumatic, toxic, you are going to see in front of you a mirror of those parts of yourself that you've given away along the journey. And now it's time to reclaim them. So for example, we talked about this authenticity, being who you really are in the face of people you know. That's the ultimate dare of just being who you really are, right? Because you think you're going to be judged, people are not going to accept you, whatever. Being vulnerable, you have to be vulnerable to be that. You have to really tell the truth, right, about yourself, right? And the more you can do that, the better. And then trusting, you got to trust that you're never alone. You know, people say, I'm so alone. I'm going, no, you're not. You go, yeah, look, there's nobody here, right? But what if the creative force that flows through everything is omnipotent, omnipresent? Then how can you be alone? If you believe that, how can you be alone? You know, yeah, oh well, yeah, you know. But I mean, it's true, you know. And you know, there's, you know, the Bible, it says, wherever two or more are together, you're never alone. Well, if God is with you the whole time, you're never alone, right? You're just imagining you're alone. You're thinking you're alone. And so I actually wrote a book of me having a conversation with God. And then people say, how do you know it was God? Because I recognized him. I'm kidding. The reason that I knew it was God is very simple. Because I questioned it the whole time. If you read the book, it's the whole time I'm very insecure, very afraid, thinking I'm going crazy. But what was happening is the radio was on in the background. And so as I'm writing, songs would play on the radio that fit perfectly with what I'm saying, the same words. The synchronicity was mind-blowing. And that's what gave me the courage. Okay, I got to keep going, right? And then I'd fall out of that certainty again. No, this is crazy. And then the songs would play, and then, okay, right? So we go in and out. So just because you were happy yesterday doesn't mean you're going to be happy tomorrow. Just because you're going to feel fantastic 1 minute doesn't mean you're going to feel fantastic all the time. We're going to experience a myriad of emotions and feelings and experiences. But isn't that the tapestry, the fabric of life? And you feel alive because you've got to know up to know down. You've got to know hot to know cold. You've got to know pain to know joy. There's a famous book by Kahlil Gibran, and in it, it's a book of poems. And he writes this beautiful poetry in it. And one of his poems, he writes, wasn't the flute that plays the most soothing music carved with knives? Isn't the pot from which you drink burned in the potter's oven? And so it is with life, right? So to the extent that you feel pain is to the extent you can feel joy. And people very often try and keep the spectrum very narrow, right? You know, oh, I don't want to do that because I'm afraid, right? Something might happen to me, right? So one of the things about me being crazy is that I kind of am a risk taker, Andrew, right? Now, I have taken some really hard falls. The book is just one example of many, right? But I always had this belief, but I believe, because I've done it so many times, that I'm always going to be okay in the end. It might take a while, but I'll be okay in the end. That this too shall pass, right? And no matter what happens, I'm going to learn. I'm going to learn a lot about myself, about life, about human nature, the human condition, which also leads into what I do. It gives me inner gifts that I wouldn't have without those experiences. It gives me an empathy I wouldn't have had I not. You know, like I said, as a child, when I was going over those things through my parents, what that meant to me was I'm always going to care about people's feelings. And I became very protective of the underdog. You know, people being picked on, people being bullied, injustice, and all those things, right? So I became a voice for them, but that can be wrong too, because sometimes you got to let, you know, like I always was like, how can a parent let their child be bullied at school? Well, what are they going to do? They're going to come and kick the crap out of the other kid? Well, that's not going to do anything, right? They've got to help that child deal with it, you know, because they're going to be bullied in life. Life is not going to say, well, you know, you're a really nice person. That's great. You're going to be, it's just not real, right? So, and I could never understand that. I'd be like, that's terrible. You know, your son is getting bullied. And I would very often step in. So I was always in fights with bullies, right? So there's a balance with everything, right? There's a balance with everything. You can help someone. And that's what I ended up doing. I would say, listen, you can do this. You know, you can stand up for yourself if you do this, this, and this. Anyway, again, patterns that were created. Some are good, some are bad.
Do you, I mean, when you and I were growing up, like you said before, things are very different, and we had we had landlines, we had messages. You know, you get a message on a phone, or if you're lucky, your parents would jot a message down to you, so-and-so call, whatever. And there wasn't that sort of instant gratification. I mean, I think when you and I were growing up, pornography was probably a picture from your parents' Playboy magazine. That was it, and that was, oh my god, there's a woman with no clothes on. It was the most exciting thing ever. Whereas now, you can see and experience and see anything you've ever imagined, things you can't imagine. You can see on this device we have in our pockets. And I wonder whether you think it's more difficult now for teenagers, young people to sort of grow up in that society where it's always on. You expect it to be always on all the time, on your smartphone, on your device, on a tablet, on social media, and then increasingly now with AI, etc. Do you think society is becoming more difficult, or do the fundamentals remain the same? There's two questions there, I guess. Is it more difficult? And then I think the fundamentals do remain the same, but how do you help late stage teens, early 20s, 30-year-olds? How do you help them sort of cope with what life is today?
Yeah. That's a deep question, man. That's not a 2-minute answer, but yes and yes and no and no. That's the easy way out, right? So let's just say that life today for young people is very different, and it has its own unique challenges. If you said to me, well, I'm going to push you, is it better or is it harder? I would say it's harder. It is harder, right? Because there's an overwhelming deluge of information, of resources that probably really shouldn't be available to children, or even in some cases young teenagers, because they are very often going to give things meaning that may not support them. Now, having said that, adults can do the same thing, right? Because they're going to take the same pattern in there. I'll tell you a quick story here that maybe will help figure this out a little bit, because this is really down to the individual, right? Now, the individual is going to be programmed different ways, right? So that's also going to come into effect. But the story is this. There is a man, a father, he's with his 2 young boys, right? And he's watching TV in the living room. Okay. But under the sofa, under one of the cushions on the sofa, is his stash, his money, and his gun, right? So they're all sitting there watching TV, watching this movie. Suddenly, the door bursts open and in come the SWAT team, right? And the man, the father, reaches under the cushion to get his gun. So they all shoot him, right? And he's dead. And there's 2 boys that have sat there watching that whole thing, right? Now, what does it mean? What does that mean? What would it mean to you?
It'd either be a lifelong hatred for the police, for authority, for anything like that, or there'd be a thought that you didn't know who my father was at all. He wasn't somebody that I recognize, as a different person altogether. So I'd just be massive confusion, I think.
Okay. And that's the right answer for you, right? That's the meaning you chose to give that experience. So one of the boys did give it that experience, hated the police, and I'm going to be a better drug dealer than my dad. I'm not going to get caught, right? And the other boy said, I'm not having anything to do with drugs. I'm never going to put myself in this situation. My point is, one event, 2 completely different meanings that took those boys in completely different directions in life. The first boy that hated the police was in and out of prison his whole life. And the other boy was very successful, went to college, did all these things. My point is, the meaning we give everything is everything, right? So, and that, they both grew up in the same environment and they both saw the same thing happen, but they gave it a different meaning. So some kids are now, there is a generality here, right? And I always say, I hate to generalize, and I usually say that right before I'm going to generalize, right? there's definitely some patterns in the lives of young people, right? So there's a lot more people feeling
Yeah.
alone. There's a lot more people that are feeling very depressed because they feel like they're not worthy because they didn't get enough likes
Mm.
on their posts. And so nobody likes them, right? Well, Jeremy got, 500 likes on his post and I got one. I'm just not worthy. And sometimes it's not even conscious, is it? Right? You know? And also, what we've seen in our world is a power shift. There's been a huge power shift from young males being the dominant force in young life to women being that dominant force, right? And men feeling disassociated uh, and not good enough, and women are being more empowered and they're becoming more successful in
Mm.
school, right?
Yep.
Statistics show that, right? Which there's nothing wrong with women becoming successful. I think that's fantastic. But sometimes, and very often, without everybody realizing it, it's at the expense of the esteem of
Mm.
boys. Now, girls go through it too, right? They have issues because again, same thing on social media. You know, I'm not pretty enough, right? And I can't afford to wear the clothes that the rich girls wear. I don't have the right handbag. I can't afford the makeup. All these things. I'm not beautiful because I can't live up to the image on the magazine. It's tough, right? Now, we had those issues a little bit when you and I grew up, but not to the extent now. It's in
Yeah.
your face 24/7, right? So I do think from that aspect, it's more difficult. But that's why it's so important that we raise our children right, that we empower them, we give them confidence no matter what, right? That we reinforce them. When we were growing up, we got our asses kicked all the time. It's not like your parents came up to you and said, "Oh, Andrew, you're amazing." You know, you kidding me? I mean, it makes you laugh, right? It's just like that's not going to happen because of their
Mm.
past. You know, and I don't know how old you are, but for me, my parents were children in the war, in the Second World War, right? Where everything was
Mm.
rationed, not just food, clothes. I mean, so they came from a very scarce environment. So that's why when I went to school, which is another source of humiliation, my mom sent me to school in school clothes that were way too big for me. My overcoat would still fit me
You
today.
grow
I kid
into
you
it.
not, right?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. You know what I was
Yeah.
just gonna say, right? So what happens though is the kids are merciless, right? So if there's anything
Yeah.
they can pick on you for, they will. Why? So it's not on them. So the light is not on them. They're terrified of being humiliated. They're terrified of being ridiculed. And so if somebody else is getting it, great, it's not me. I'm going to join in, right? But my point is, those kind of things don't happen as much today. I mean, you have to have a
Mhm.
uniform when you're a kid, right? That wasn't easy for our parents to do, right? So you have to have a separate set of clothes
Yeah.
to go to school. But most schools today don't have uniforms. The kids just wear what they want, and so it's easier for them to have an
Mm.
identity, right? Because clothes do speak to our identity. They're a reflection of who we feel we are, right? So yeah, it's a very, very deep question. Um, it's amazing though that what we went through as children served us for the life we were going to live,
Mhm.
right? And so there's a for a long time, parents were really worried about their kids being on games, right? Playing games too much, and they would say to their kids, you need to be in school. How's playing games going to help you in life? Well, now they get paid millions of dollars to play these games
Yeah.
professionally, right? So we just don't know what's going to happen. And I do think that all this trauma and these difficulties that are going through with social media are at some point going to serve, right? There's going to be things that these young people are going to be able to do that will serve them in the future that's coming. So, for example, using computers, you can't, you know, you have to be able to use a computer. You're going to have to be able to use AI, right? And you're going to be using a lot of the skills that you've used in these social media platforms by using those things, right? We're just going through it's like a birthing process, right? It ain't easy, right? There's going to be a lot of pain, a lot of blood, right? but eventually it's going to lead us to a better place. That's my perception.
When you have a client or a patient, I'm not sure what you call them, when you have somebody that comes to you, what does healthy accountability look like? So someone recognizes that their desires, their actions have caused harm to someone else. Is it appropriate to talk to that person that you've caused harm to? So in your 4 marriages that weren't ultimately successful to the present day, what are things you wish you could go back and apologize for, or where does accountability live within that sort of spectrum of conversation?
Yeah. Well, I'm still friends with them all, right? So I think we've got past that,
That's
you know
pretty
what I mean?
impressive.
And I never blamed them, you see. I never had anger towards them at all, right? They did for a while, but it kind of subsided, and no one of them ever. I don't think any of them ever said you did this to me, right? Which is quite remarkable, right? And they might have done when we were in the marriage, but after, I think they recognized they were better off without me. I don't know, maybe whatever. So yeah, I don't, and that's just me. I don't think. I mean, I've had things happen to me in my life that are just, you could really be mad at people. But let me give you an example here, right? So this is where, now, I didn't have this belief when I was a kid. I think maybe for me as a kid, the reason I didn't really have long-term resentment or anger towards people. I mean, some of the guys that used to ridicule me, I mean, when I was a kid, I was the kid in the shower that got humiliated for having a small dick, right? So, and that doesn't end in the shower. It goes throughout the whole school, right? And it was humiliating, and that was terribly painful. But the 2 kids that actually began that whole thing, that started the whole thing, were good friends of mine. And I never, I didn't have any resentment or anger towards them. That might be a little weird, but it probably comes from my insecurity that I just want to be liked, right? And I'll put up with pretty much anything, which isn't healthy either. But the upside of it is that I don't harbor anger or resentment, because I believe everything happens for the greater good, right? It will lead you to a good place. It's either going to give you resilience, it's going to build your character, and there's a silver lining. So for example, let me explain this one to you, because this is, you're going, it's a good thing to be told you got a small dick and all the girls in school know it. And well, yeah, it was a gift. Why? Because then I became an overachiever in the bedroom, right? And I became really, really good at it, to the point where women would say, that was fucking amazing, right? Because all I wanted to do in the bedroom was give pleasure. It was never about me, right? It was me wanting to give pleasure, to get that recognition that even though I might have had a small dick, I was good in the bedroom, right? So now it became something I got a lot of esteem for, a lot of attention for, got significance for. So silver lining, if that hadn't happened to me, I wouldn't have been an overachiever in the bedroom, right? Which, goes into the book, right? Where we could spend 3 days in the sex room, because I was pleasuring her in all kinds of different ways and being creative. And then it was difficult for me to get and have and take pleasure, right? Because my focus was so intensely on giving her pleasure, it would be difficult for me to ejaculate in the end, right? Because I'd just gone past that point. We did manage it, but my point is, everything has a silver lining, everything has a silver lining. And sometimes it also has a negative too, right? So nothing is 100% one or the other, right? Did that answer your question?
It really did. So when you work with people, and I'm sure.
Oh yeah, you were talking about
And
working with people. Yeah, that's
a lot
right.
of people, we all, well, many of us carry shame about things. Maybe it's about an affair we've had, or an addiction, or a desire that we feel unable to express because we feel it's very unusual, it's an extreme kink or whatever. How do you help people recognize the difference between releasing shame and avoiding responsibility?
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I could tell you a story now, but this is going to take too long. So I'll refrain from telling them. So the essence of the story is this little soul wants to come on earth and have an experience of forgiving somebody, right? So he says to God, I want to go to earth and experience forgiveness. Would that be good? And God says, oh, yeah, that'd be really good. And God then says, there's just one problem, though. And this little soul says, well, you're God. You think of something, right? So then in the background, there's all these other little souls that are watching this soul have its conversation with God. And then one of them raises his hand and he says, I will do something for you to forgive me for. And this other little soul said, you would? But why would you do that? Why would you lower your vibration so low that you would do something to hurt me or smite me? And the other little soul says, because I love you. And don't you remember? You and I, we've done this many times before. We've been the victim and the villain of it. Oh, yeah, we've done it many times before. But all I ask of you is when I come into your next life, and I do that for you, that you remember who I really am. And the other little soul says, absolutely. And so they run off to go to earth to have their life experience. And God shouts out to them, always remember, I have sent you nothing but angels. So if you can take on that, then it's easier to embrace the idea that nothing happens to you, it all happens for you. And that person that you think smited you really loves you. And in their essence of who they are, they were doing it for you. For you, perhaps, to forgive them and have that experience of what it really means to forgive. Forgiveness is a pathway to love. But if you can't forgive, you've got a block. You're not going to get there, right? And ultimately, when you've forgiven everybody that you feel has smited you, who do you realize that you need to forgive?
Yourself.
And then you're home.
You've been super generous with your time. I don't want to keep you all day, but just two more questions, if that's okay. So one would be, you've been through so many experiences in your life, and you look at them now with a very, very positive outlook. I just wonder, how do you nurture your own, I guess, physical and mental well-being? How do you nourish yourself?
Yeah, great question. So I meditate for an hour in the morning, an hour at night. When I've meditated, I go work out. I work out pretty much every day, sometimes twice a day. I eat very healthily. I have a juice every morning that's, I put it in an emulsifier, my Vitamix, right? I have spinach. It's not complicated. I have spinach. I have some protein powders and some other healthy things that go in there, nutrients, vitamins. And I keep it pretty simple, but it's green, it's alkalized, and then I have a few other supplements that I take, but I keep it simple. So I'm constantly nourishing my mind, my body, and my spirit, right? And that's my foundation. If you actually read the book, I kept getting away from that because my focus on her was so intense. And then when we break up, I go, okay, I get back to it again, right? It was the up and down, right? So that's how I nourish myself. I read. I just started reading that book I told you about that I wrote when I had this conversation with God. I just started reading again. I'm going, holy hell, this is amazing stuff, right? But at the time, even though I went through that, even though I doubted it, and even though God was showing God's presence in there, and it doesn't matter whether it was my higher self or whoever it was, but there was something going on, right? I was having an experience, right? Anyway, but I didn't really go out and market the book because I constantly went back to self-doubt, low self-esteem. People will never believe me, right? What's the point? All these things that, I would tell people not to believe that. I did it myself, so I know how easy it can be to fall into those things, So constantly doing things that help to build your esteem. So one of the things that helps build your esteem is to have specific goals every day and complete them. Meditation, working out, drinking a juice, or you've already like, I achieved those goals. It makes you feel good. Because promise me, you don't want to do those things every day, right? You don't always want to go to the gym. You always don't want to, yeah, I don't want to meditate right now. But but you do it, and that's discipline. And if you're disciplined, now you can be too disciplined too, just so you're aware. And that I could get that way, right? Because I'm intense, right? But if you can do that in a I'm trying to think of a word, but you know what I mean? Don't do it too much, but do it a little bit to the point where, wow, I feel good about myself to start the day. Good to start on a good footing, right? You've got the endorphins running through your body, right? From the working out. You've got good energy, good nourishment going through your body. You've meditated, so you've got rid of whatever the stresses were the day before. How can you not feel good? It's possible, by the way, but you're gonna much better start than you would have otherwise, right?
And as you talk about the importance of daily goals, which I fully agree with. So, are you a planner? Do you know what the next 5 years brings? I mean, obviously, the book ends with lots of questions that the reader wants to get answered. So, I'm guessing there's a part 2 to the book. But then, do you have a plan or a vision for the next sort of 10 years?
I do. Yeah. But I'm not, and I would tell people, listen, you want to have a mission, a vision, and a purpose, right? You want to have as many things that are going to remind you that as possible, so it doesn't disappear from your imagination, that'll hold it in place. And I talk about, having a picture board, make it with all the, whatever you want. But to be honest, if you really want to do it and you're passionate about it, you don't need to do any of those things. It becomes your life, right? It's just what you do, right? This is what I'm about. This is what my life is about. So, to answer your question more fully, yes, I do have a mission, a vision, a purpose. And that is, this book is the beginning. It will be a TV series. It'll be on Netflix or Hulu or a movie, probably all of those, right? I'll be doing my live events, about the content of this, toxic relationships, that kind of thing. And so it's gonna, and then obviously, with the movie and the TV series, there's going to be a product line, and we're also going to be doing stage shows, about sexuality, about freedom of expression, about not being ashamed, and I've imagined it all, right? It's all in my mind, all in my image, and it's all going to be a progression of the book, right? So the book is the foundation, and then it's going to go from the audio program, all these things that you can imagine that would normally happen, right? But with the focus on being of service, right? Helping people embrace who they really are, and whatever that means to them, But I think sexuality is still an issue. I mean, we're going through a sexual revolution, and I actually talk about it a little bit in the book. We're going through a sexual revolution right now. Now, the reality is we always have been. We've always been progressing and moving further. And you can think about people that have come into our consciousness that have really pushed the boundaries. I mean, just a couple of examples would be Madonna or Lady Gaga or those kind of things. And then making women feel it's okay to have that sexuality and express it openly. And of course, there's others, Dua Lipa right now is also doing that. But it's helping people grow into their sexuality. You've got things like Burning Man and others like it, right? Where people can go and have a sense of freedom of sexual expression and other kinds of creativity. Some of the things they do are amazing. The creativity is amazing, right? So there are becoming more and more outlets and resources for people to own their sexuality. So here's an example, right? So women wear these high heel shoes today. Those were only worn by strippers at one time, right? So all that is coming out, and women, wearing a corset on the outside of your body, they're like, what? Right? These were things that people would keep hidden, right? That are now becoming more open, and people are expressing it, which is fantastic for guys, right? We love it. Right. But also men too. I'm just joking. And also about, the fact that, what is your pronoun? What do you want to be today? And just like we've talked about, everything is a wave, right? So our reality is on a wave, and we can only see things that are in the wave that our eyesight can see. But we know there's a whole universe beyond that, right? So these waves come and go. So I was listening to, and I can never remember his name properly. It's Tyson something or other, Mark Tyson. It's a 3-barrel name, and he's an astronomer, right? Astrologist, right? He's brilliant. He's amazing. He's
Neil,
the most
Neil
famous.
deGrasse Tyson.
Neil deGrasse Tyson. Perfect. Yeah. So he's amazing, and he talks about all different aspects of life, and he's obviously super intelligent, right? So he was in a debate with the two guys that host the podcast Trigonometry.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen that? And so they're saying, but there's only, you can only be a man or a woman. There's only two genders. And he says, well, but you're talking about a different thing, right? So if you think about our sexuality as a wave, then why couldn't you wake up one day and say, yeah, I want to be a man today. I'm going to wear a pair of pants and I'm going to go out and be very manly, right? Or another day you wake up and you feel very feminine and I want to wear a dress. That's hard for most people to wrap their head around, but that's the future. That is what it's going to be. And we're going to need to accept that, even though we may not want to do it. I don't want to get up in the day and wear a dress. I don't, right? But I'm a dinosaur, right? Eventually, that's why I won't be here anymore, and I'm okay with that, right? But what's happening is we're becoming more androgynous. That's the future, and the future is androgyny, right? Where we're going to be non-gender specific. That's hard to believe, but it's going to happen. I mean, and if you think about it, how many people have seen aliens, and how many people always describe them the same way? They're androgynous. And so that's the future. Now, how far away? It ain't going to be next week, right? But that's the future. My point is, the more we can just accept other people's choice of how they express their sexuality, the easier it's going to be for all of us. Because what's the point of getting stressed out about it? You ain't going to change it, right? Now, are there certain boundaries that we want to create? I believe that there are, right? We don't just want to let everybody go off and say, it could get crazy really quickly. Yeah. So we do want to create boundaries. Like, so for example, if someone decides they want to change their sexuality, they want to go from being a man to a woman, yes, they have a right to do that. But we need to be damn sure they really mean it, right? Before they go through that change, because it's so dramatic. And there have been many people that decided to do it because they thought it was going to be a bit of fun to be a change, but then they realized they want to go back, right? Now, you can't entirely stop that, but you could make it a lot more difficult, right? To really know that this is something that perhaps this person has felt all their life. You know what I mean? Not just decided last week. Well, I was just thinking, thought it'd be good, thought it'd be fun. So there are barriers, or maybe not barriers, but boundaries we can set up for that. But you're not going to stop it. You're just not going to stop it. It's coming, and it's coming more and more by the day, by the week, by the month, by the year. So what we're going to do is wrap our heads around it, understand it, make it as safe as possible we can for people to be that way, because it can be very dangerous. It can be very dangerous. A number of levels. Number one, it can be very dangerous with the procedures that go along with it. That can kill you, right? They're not done properly. That's another reason why we want to make sure that we don't make it illegal, so that people have to go underground.
Completely wrong. Yeah, and I think it's interesting what you said. I think there's a definitely a shift happening now. I think there's a difference between gender, male and female, and masculinity and femininity. And I do think more and more men are embracing the fact that they have a divine feminine, and more and more women are expressing the fact they have a divine masculine, the fact that we contain multitudes, basically. And yes, the externality of how we appear is one thing, but actually inside is, and I think hopefully people are recognizing you can embrace, expose, explore the masculine and feminine within yourself. I think I 100% agree that's definitely the place we should be. Recognizing that everything that's ever existed, like I say, we are ultimately light and energy, and we just happen to manifest in this form today. But many years ago, one form, many years in the future, be another form, and it's just how we express ourselves as we are today. So, no, I totally agree.
Yeah. And as what happens is, we could talk for hours, I know, right? So when we go through these changes, it's kind of like the pendulum swinging, right?
That's
The
nice.
wave. It never swings
No.
to the middle.
No.
It goes to extremes, right? And so we're seeing that now. We're seeing a lot of men becoming so feminine that they're not attractive to women, even though women will say, oh, I want a guy that'll do this. And, in the past you would say, women usually have gay men friends, right? Because they're very feminine, but they don't want to spend their life with them, and they don't want them to be their physical partner, right? Women want a man. They want masculinity, right? And then what they're doing is, at the moment, is because the pendulum swung so far, and this isn't every woman, right? But a lot of women, and it's coming back a little bit now. But they say they want this guy to be this way, and they really don't. And then if the man tries to break out of that and become more masculine, they say that's toxic masculinity, right? So these words get banded around. But this is part of the change of a paradigm. It's not going to be easy. We're going to go in and out. We're going to go up and down. We're going to go to the point where we push it too far, and then we're going to go back. I mean, that's just life. That's how it works.
Thank you. Like you said, but I can very happily keep talking to you. I completely see why people resonate towards you for support and counselling and guidance. So thank you so much for your time. I look forward to reading the next book, and just keep producing the out, folks. It's important. You're delving into important topics in a vulnerable, in the most positive use of that word, manner that I haven't seen before. So no, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me on. I appreciate that too, man. And say hello to England for me.
I'll wait to Blackpool as our next flyover to the US.
Oh yeah. Don't go there though. Just wait. You're getting a lot of trouble. All right. Well, yes, ma'am. I look forward to doing it again down the road. In the meantime, thank you very much for having me.